So you kind of touched on it a bit. In the 60s, Colin, being known as the thoughtful architect that he was, and who was possibly at the time considering becoming a city councilor, turned out to be one with the Stop Spadina movement. Can you explain a little bit about what that movement was and how it affected or could have affected the city, in particular Alexandra Park?
There were a number of things at play in the 60s, and this neighborhood is a product of that kind of mindset where old neighborhoods were being flattened and projects were being built, big roads, big housing projects, big transit projects. It was incredibly destructive. You know, it's weird. You know, if this neighborhood had been left to evolve by itself, many of the families that are tenants here would have been homeowners now, and that would have transformed their sense of security and sense of place in the city, and the community would have looked much like Kensington Market does. You know, and it was lost. It was lost to this kind of vision that the government knew best, that communities didn't have control over their own future, and that big projects could displace people and break things, things that you'd never get back because of the fragility of the way communities sort of organically are created in urban spaces, especially older parts of Toronto. My dad had a bit of a conversion on the road. I mean, he used to build tall buildings and race cars and do all the things like a typical sort of 50s, 60s architect would do. But he met someone called Jane Jacobs. She challenged him to think differently. Her books certainly changed his way of thinking about cities. And he started to lead campaigns to push the big developers away, to push the big projects away, and to really hold on to what was precious in the city, which is unique in the city, which is the neighborhoods that had organically grown out of the earliest architecture in Toronto. And so, as he really stopped doing that kind of architecture that was just simply building buildings and started to think more about building cities. He led the citizens movement that stopped the expressway, that changed the course of history for the downtown. It was too late to save this neighborhood, but I think that this neighborhood is surrounded by these old neighborhoods around Toronto, are close to Chinatown, close to Kensington Market. The neighborhood schools are still, neighborhood schools that kids walk to and don't take buses to. All these sorts of things were products of the thinking that my father, embraced and absorbed. And when he was on a city council, he moved to do things like the first co-op around the corner, the Alexander Park co-op, not the Alex Park co-op, the Sonny Atkins co-op, things like that, the Scatting Court. They really worked hard at building stronger and stronger community institutions and empowering neighborhoods to dream their own future and not have to have city council come along and bulldoze everything, but instead to champion the lived experience of people in these communities and to build neighborhoods around them, but build neighborhoods with them and for them. And it was a good practice, and I think it led to a lot of the great things we love about Toronto still being part of what we describe when we talk about Toronto to people who are visiting for the first time or never seen the city. Strong neighborhoods, good community centers, adjacency to schools, parks, human scale, safe streets to walk on, and traffic that is not overwhelming the senses or putting kids at risk, and all these sorts of things. And you can see it in Alex Park. Right? It's still a neighborhood. It still sees itself as a neighborhood. It behaves as a neighborhood, and it's dreamt a new future for itself as a neighborhood. And those qualities come out of that school of thinking that cities are magic places. And you have to be careful with them because they house people and people with dreams. And even though they'll change and they evolve, if they evolve as a human project as opposed to an engineering project, you get better results. And this community to this day has thrived under those sorts of conditions.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Being a former resident of the community and living in different parts of the city, it's very, very hard to find something similar to the vibe that's just down and around here. And that pretty much nails why.
People know each other. Like
Exactly.
that's not as common downtown as it. I mean, we take it for granted in neighborhoods where that's true still. But it's rare. Like when you knock doors in this neighborhood, or when you hang in this neighborhood for any period of time, you see the families taking care of each other's kids. You see young people taking groceries for older folks. You see a real sense of community here that is partly born out of I think the closeness of the homes, the way the backyards all look onto each other, the safe spaces for kids to play. All of these things you can really take for granted, and as the new neighborhood is rebuilt, and as we try to upgrade the quality of the housing and make sure that we house people properly. One of the things that was said very early on in the revitalization process, a young guy walked up to me and he said, "Mr. Vaughan, you can fix the neighborhood, but don't break the community." And he was deadly serious about it, right? And one of my big fears when I see the new houses and the new condos and I see the changes happening, is one of the biggest fears is how fragile what's special about this community is. And you just hope and pray that we get it right. And one of the good things about going slow and taking 10, 15 years to realize the full project is that you do have a bit of a space to fix mistakes and to rethink things and to look at streets differently and to reimagine the community center as the neighborhood evolves and changes. And so all of these things that are precious about this neighborhood need to be sustained. And you have to be intentional about it if you're going to do it. And the residents are the folks that have the lived experience and understand it better than anybody. And that's why we've worked so hard to make sure that they're not just at the table, but they're leading the conversation the entire time. And so it's an interesting neighborhood. You can ask people right across this country, and wherever I go, I talk about Alex Park. And I used to say when I was a city councillor, the Alex Park could use a bit more of the city. The city could use a hell of a lot more of Alex Park, and the same is true for Canada. Like I've walked ministers through here. I've walked housing advocates through here. I've walked tenants and residents from other projects and communities and neighborhoods across Canada through here. I talk about it endlessly as an example of what happens when you trust people to dream their own future. And so, it's going to be exciting to see the changes, but you're always nervous that some of the magic of this community is going to disappear when the backyards get a little smaller and the houses don't quite face each other the way they do in this funny little sort of S-shaped neighborhood and stuff. So it's tricky, but you got to trust the residents to make the right call and back the residents when they see a problem.